So when we talked about the bell curves, if you remember the slide with, what kind of manager do you prefer? I mentioned that most immigrants who come to Canada today come from countries that are significantly more hierarchical than Canada is. What does that mean? Well, this is what we're going to look at in this video. So, what I have plotted on this chart are the results of a study conducted by a Dutch social scientist. His name is Geert Hofstede, or Geert Hofstede if you pronounce it the American way. So this guy, he's Dutch, he did a study of IBM subsidiaries around the world, sent a questionnaire to people, to IBM employees, collected 120,000 answers, did all the statistical analysis, came up with 6 dimensions of culture. And in my opinion, the most important one is what he calls power distance, and I'll call it hierarchy. So fundamentally, what does this chart represent? Well, it measures the psychological distance between me and someone who has authority over me. So I will call cultures that have a score above 50 hierarchical, and I will call cultures that have a score below 50 egalitarian. You will notice Canada is on the egalitarian side. In Canada, we'll treat one another approximately equally at first order. In hierarchical cultures, the way people at the top of society are treated is quite different from the way people at the bottom of society are treated in many circumstances. All right? So who has authority over me? Well, it will be my parents when I was a child, my professors, my teachers, a police officer who stops me in the streets, a border officer when I'm going through immigration. All these people have authority over me. But there is one obvious situation where, in the workplace, where this makes a huge difference, is the relationship between me and my manager. Obviously, my manager has authority over me. Well, what does being a manager mean? So on this slide, what I have represented is drawings that were created by a lady called Yang Liu. This lady grew up in China. When she turned 13, she emigrated to Germany. Well, she moved to Germany with her parents. And she moved country at the time when people's identity gets formed, and so she understands intuitively both sides. So her version would have Germany and China, but I'm going to generalize it as Canada and most home countries of immigrants to Canada. As we've discussed in the previous slide, most immigrants who come to Canada come from countries that are significantly more hierarchical than Canada. Think about it. Let me go back to the previous slide for a second. As you can see, Canada is not the most egalitarian culture in the world. There are countries that are even more egalitarian, meaning they have even lower scores on this chart than Canada. Sweden, Norway, Finland, Denmark, Scandinavian countries generally tend to be the most egalitarian cultures. The point is, today, how many immigrants come from this part of the world? Well, we do get a few Swedish hockey players in Canada, but that's about it. I mean, most immigrants who come to Canada come from countries that are to the right of Canada on this chart. The top 3 countries of immigration to Canada today are the Philippines, China, and India. And as you can see, they are significantly to the right compared with Canada. More generally, where do most immigrants come from? Well, it's going to be Asia, Africa, Latin America, and Eastern Europe. And these parts of the world are significantly more hierarchical than Canada is. So in the workplace, what it means is this. How do I see my manager? How do I conceptualize his or her authority? Well, in many of the countries where immigrants come from, the manager is the center of their employees' universe. In egalitarian cultures like Canada, my manager is first among peers. His or her opinion obviously counts more than mine, but the imbalance between the two opinions is much lower in Canada than it is in the home countries of many immigrants who come to Canada. So this creates, for example, major issues if you have a meeting, okay, where the manager disagrees with the rest of the team. What we have seen in situations like this is if you have the manager disagrees with the rest of the team, hierarchical employees or team members will conclude, well, we should follow the manager's direction because he or she is the manager, whereas egalitarian people will conclude that, well, we should follow the team's direction because that's the largest number of opinions. After the meeting, they go in very different directions. I find this is critical for both Canadians and immigrants to understand, because hierarchy, in my experience, is very deeply ingrained in both, well, hierarchy or lack thereof is very deeply ingrained in both hierarchical or egalitarian people. Hierarchical people tend to see hierarchy everywhere. Egalitarian people tend to see it nowhere. So we live in parallel universes. We do not interpret the situation from the same vantage point. And that creates scores of misunderstandings in the workplace. And we're going to talk about some of these misunderstandings in the next few videos.